So hi again, everyone. Thanks for showing up. This is going to be a pretty brief overview for the history of StarkWare. The title here is a bit deceiving, I think, because we're going to touch on layer 3s at the end, but that's not the main focus of this talk. It's basically an overview of the path that StarkWare, like the company, went through since 2018. And since this is a pretty intimate forum, I invite you to ask questions, and let's try to make it more interactive. The purpose of this is to be interesting to you, and there's a really good representation of people from StarkWare and the StarkNet Foundation. So Manmeet from the foundation, the dev advocacy team, Remo is one of the lead engineers, Francis from the BD team, and I'm a product manager. So more than happy to make it more like conversational. All right, so a little bit about StarkWare. We're an Israeli company, started in 2018. Today we're a little over 140 employees. And just to give you some context on the growth, when I joined, it wasn't even 2 years ago, we were 40 people. So we grew by over 100 people in the last 2 years, raised a fair amount of funding, and we're very proud of our academic roots. So Eli, who's one of the founders of StarkWare, was also a founding scientist at Zcash, and is the co-inventor of the Stark protocol. His PhD advisor was, I guess, back in the 90s or late 80s, is Avi Vigdersen. He's one of the 90s? Not that old? Okay. Avi is one of the giants of the field of complexity theory. He's an advisor to StarkWare, together with Shafi, who's one out of 3 people who invented the field of ZK. That was back in the 80s, I think. And Noam is not just an advisor, he's like working at StarkWare, helping us design the transition from StarkNet being fully operated by StarkWare into a truly decentralized system with many players that operate different components, and they all have to be incentivized the right way. And the reason that I mention this is that we believe that it's our expertise in engineering and in our academic background, together with the experience in company building, that allowed us to progress in the pace in which we've been progressing so far. The first chapter is going to be about StarkNet, so a really brief overview on what StarkNet, what we did, where we're going, and a little bit about the ecosystem. So that's a screenshot from StarkScan. I don't know how, like I see some familiar faces and some other people here, I guess it's like, might have been their first StarkNet meetup, so I'm going to say some things that may be trivial to some, but StarkScan is a block explorer on StarkNet, 1 out of 3 block explorers. We love the fact that there's a healthy amount of redundancy in infrastructure and tools like block explorers. I'm going to touch on that in a second. We almost touched 50 TPS last month. The average TPS over the past month was a little over 30 TPS, which is great, especially given the fact that we're not incentivizing transactions, we're not incentivizing activity in any way. This is all like authentic activity on the network. Obviously, it's more TPS in Ethereum, but it's also more TPS than almost any other blockchain or any other layer 2 I can think of. And also thinking about the fact that we have multi-call transactions on StarkNet makes it even more impressive, I think. Multi-call means that transactions on StarkNet can be bundles of many different transactions, many different interactions with various smart contracts. So every transaction, I think of every transaction on StarkNet as a primitive that is often a lot more complex than transactions on Ethereum. When we first started designing StarkNet, one of the fundamental decisions that we made was to create the best scaling solution without necessarily constraining ourselves to the boundaries of the EVM. And this led us to make some, I think, pretty radical decisions, like having a blockchain that doesn't have EOAs at all. So account abstraction is not just like a first-class citizen. It's the only citizen that you have on StarkNet. Every smart contract every account on StarkNet is a smart contract account. it's good for two reasons. One is it creates great user experience, and two, it helps users interact safely with their apps. So I see like the cartridge guys nodding there. Better UX, because with smart contracts you can do stuff like easy onboard, like seamless onboarding for users, creating the account on the fly after they send the first transaction. Soon, when we have fee abstraction, apps would be able to subsidize part of the fees for their users. So some really cool things that you can do on the user experience front, and essentially bring the experience that we have on Web 2 products to the Web 3 world. This is what like many people would say is what's missing today in crypto to bring the mass adoption of Web 2 users into crypto. And safer interaction is also another thing that's enabled by account abstraction. Just an example, if I have an EOA and I lose my keys, or I share my, like Manmeet mentioned before, I share my private keys on a Zoom call just for a second by mistake, that's it, game over. All my funds are gone. But with account abstraction, you can introduce mechanisms like social recovery that create some steps in like what is the worst things that can happen if you lose your keys, and how can you mitigate events like losing your keys.
Just compromising your key in account abstraction, you can just replace it.
Right.
Set public key and that's it.
It really depends on how do you design your account. You can create like multiple keys. Each key would allow you to do something very specific. Another set of keys that can only do recovery. Like you can get really creative with the logic around keys there. All right. So Cairo is a smart contract language used for writing programs on Starknet. The first product that we created at StarkWare was StarkX. I'm going to talk a little bit about StarkX in a few slides. But what you should know is that Cairo didn't always exist. Like the first thing that we put in production was the system where you had to represent your business logic by creating by representing it in as sets of constraints and polynomials, which was really hard, really hard to do safely. It was quite tedious, and we didn't expect anyone outside of Stark to be able to write code like that. And then we introduced Cairo, which is a way to abstract away all the complexities of ZK and let people write Turing-complete programs in a way that we'd be able to prove. And the two things I want you to know about Starknet about Cairo in that context is that it abstracts away all the complexity of ZK, and that today it's quite developer friendly. It wasn't always like that. Some people here might have played with Cairo last year, or even earlier than that. Back then it was still kind of clunky, but we introduced the new Cairo 1.0 version recently, which really, I think, improved Cairo in many aspects, so that it would be safe to say today that we're almost as comfortable, like it's almost as comfortable to write Cairo as it is comfortable to write Rust. We are missing some of the like infrastructure and dev tools, but in terms of the language itself, it's very like ergonomic. And in terms of performance, so today every few hours we send a block to be approved on Ethereum. On average, every block includes 200,000 Cairo transactions, and when you average that, you'd get to a cost of 50 gas per transaction, which is significantly lower than the, I think, 80,000 gas benchmark that an ERC20 transfer would cost you. So this is like a really significant improvement in terms of cost. Any questions, comments? All right. Yeah.
Is that for like any transaction or just like a simple?
So we picked like an average transaction. I think that this benchmark was calculated based on an ERC20 transfer.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's a good point. Like saying transaction, even like this slide that measured TPS, it's kind of like, because not all transactions are the same. So this number, I think, is for an ERC20 transfer. So a few words about the roadmap. So far, in the past few months, we've been very focused on improving throughput and latency. And in August, we introduced version 12 in StarkNet with reduced block execution time, increased throughput, and lower transaction latency. That was a big step that that allowed this jump that you see here. And the next frontiers are reducing transaction cost and improving UX. So on version 13, we're going to focus on introducing volition. That's a hybrid data availability mode. We expect it to be on mainnet Q1 of next year. It's basically a way to let users and app developers decide if they want to put the data related to the transactions on-chain or off-chain. Today, all data is forced to be on-chain, which makes transactions quite expensive. Version 14 is about a fee market, basically improving UX in the existence of congestion in the network, letting people pay more for a transaction if they want it to be included faster. And Paymaster is another way to improve UX, kind of relates to the point I mentioned earlier about easy onboarding. So for example, if I'm an app and I want to subsidize the first few transactions for my trial users, this is something that would allow you to do that. Right, so a few thoughts about the ecosystem. Most of StarkNet's ecosystem today, I think, is still focused on dev tools and infrastructure and not apps. We're starting to see change with this meetup, for example. That's not sponsored by any dev tool creator. That's a screenshot from Electric Capital's developer report. Their VC that put out this report that shows the growth in the number of developers in various ecosystems. They're not our investors, by the way. And you can see StarkNet here on the left side. We're growing quite fast. It's still the early days for StarkNet, so the graph kind of like cuts here. But you see that the slope is kind of steep. And what we really appreciate about the ecosystem today is that it's still the early days of StarkNet, but we're already quite decentralized. And there's a healthy amount of redundancy in most aspects of infrastructure and tooling. It's very, it would be, well, we always like to say that it would be really, it would be a failure on our end if a year or 2 years from now, StarkNet still depends on StarkWare, the company, to exist. So we love seeing other players taking major roles in pushing the network forward. Right, so now let's take a step back and talk about how we got here. So you see that things happened at StarkWare before StarkNet. We started in 2018, kind of standing on the shoulders of giants from two different verticals, the Ethereum giants and the ZK giants. And the first product that we introduced was StarkX. That's an enterprise SaaS sort of product. It's the engine that operates some platforms that I'm sure that you're familiar with, like Immutable and DYDX and SoRare. And as I mentioned before, this was like a proprietary way to do very particular things like NFT minting and perp trading, where the logic was written by us. The logic here is represented by basically constraints and polynomials. We didn't expect anyone else to be able to write it. Yes?
Was StarkX originally in Solidity?
No, so
Solidity go to the roots and not being enough out of bounds is down in L1. So we have a smart contract that allows to advance the roots and to have money deposited and withdrawn. But the logic itself that is being proven is not in Solidity. It's in, from the version 2 and on, it was Cairo, and before that it was custom here. Yeah, but it was off-chain.
the Solidity part is very far, and I'm gonna show that in a few slides. So that was StarkX, and then we introduced Cairo, which was kind of like a game changer because it allowed people to represent provable programs in a high-level language. So it kind of democratized the access to StarkX to a lot of people outside of StarkWare. And then came Sharp, and recursion is another improvement on top of Sharp, basically bundling a lot of different Cairo programs and proving their execution of multiple Cairo programs in one proof, which made things a lot more efficient. The reason that that I think is interesting to talk about this is first that we're really proud of all this innovative stuff, and second is that crypto systems in production are kind of like open bounty programs, and usually the longer a system has been in production, the safer it is. All the StarkX systems have had more than $1 trillion in transaction volume today, and we have $500 million in TVL locked into those systems. And those are the systems that are the foundation for Starknet. Like a lot of how Starknet works is based on this technology. So the fact that it's been in production for so long, I think attests for the security of Starknet, which was introduced much later. And another cool thing is that through all those systems, like StarkX instances and Starknet, we help users save over 500,000 ETH, a little over $1 billion in today's worth in Ethereum fees, which is awesome, I think, because it means that it allowed users to do things that they couldn't have done otherwise.
I think that if they actually have centered the transaction on Ethereum, it would be 10 billion and not 1 billion.
Because they'd increased demand, yes. Any questions on this before we're like 3 slides from the end. So if you have any questions on any of this. All right, so a few words about the next steps with StarkWare and Starknet and where we had it. So how does Starknet work? We have this. This goes back to the question that was asked here a few minutes ago. So Starknet, we have an on-chain verifier on Ethereum that's written in Solidity, and we have the off-chain component, the sequencer and prover. What is an Appchain? Basically, take this component, duplicate it, and you get an Appchain. Now, why do it? First, you'd enjoy all the benefits that you get on Starknet, Cairo, Volition soon, Paymaster, count abstraction, and all that. And also, it would allow you to control the different parameters of the network. We see some apps wanting to have a faster network or a more private network by going on an app chain rather than running on top of the public Starknet, you'll be able to control all those parameters. And this obviously comes with the drawback of operating in an isolated environment where you don't have composability and don't have liquidity, or like you don't have shared liquidity with other apps. Is that terrible? At first, we got a lot of criticism for introducing StarkX. Like people said exactly those two things. What apps would run in an isolated environment with no liquidity and no composability? But then DYDX emerged, and it's a pretty successful app that operates in the system of its own. So I'd argue that there's still some use cases where operating in your own environment makes a lot of sense, and we will see some apps spread across like an app chain and maybe Starknet or some other public chain. I also want to mention Paradox. That's the first POC for a Starknet upchain that we announced a few weeks ago. It's basically a perpetual trading platform that's still running on that still runs on testnet, but it's going to be introduced on mainnet pretty soon. And the last thing is an L3. That's a pretty simple concept. The same way that Starknet commits its proofs to Ethereum, which is the layer 1. If you think of a network that commits its proof to Starknet, you can conceivably think of it as a network that went one way up. So we'll call it an L3. Why do it? Basically because you'd enjoy all the benefits of an app chain with even greater cost reduction. This is still like a theoretic concept that we've been playing with. we don't expect to make any progress on that front in the next, let's say, 6 months. All right. Last thing I wanted to say is that if you want to dig deeper into any of the technical concepts that I mentioned here, you're very lucky, because last month we had the StarkNet Summit in San Francisco. It was a day full of StarkNet talks. Many people from StarkWare came to talk about their engineering work, and it's all on YouTube. So look for the StarkNet Summit talks. There are deep dives into many of the things I mentioned and more. Yeah, and that's it. Don't be a stranger. If it's your first steps on StarkNet, check out StarkNet IO, or get in touch with any of the StarkWare people here. Yeah, thank you.